and welcome to the last PowerSpeaking Live event of 2022. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, your host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. We have the benefit of hearing from three of PowerSpeaking's expert facilitators and coaches who are also professional stage actors. And I know in speaking to them that there are many instances in which they draw on strategies and techniques that they've used or learned from years of acting to help professionals enhance their presentation skills for better results. And that is exactly what we're going to unpack in the session today. For example, I posed a question for you in chat. Feel free to respond. I'm curious to know if any of you experience stage fright when presenting or potentially acting, if you too are an actor. That's an example of something that we'll explore with our panelists, along with much, much more. So with that backdrop, let's get to know our panelists. Joining us today, we have Lisa Rothman, sporting a lovely fascinator. Very lovely. Lisa has helped countless professionals at organizations like Genentech, eBay, Autodesk, and Gilead up their game by improving the way in which they convey their ideas and influence positive outcomes as one of our master facilitators. Lisa also, as I mentioned, is a professional actor, and she has, through her One Women shows, sold out countless theaters and raised all kinds of funds for worthy causes. Lisa brings her love of performing virtually and in person to the workshops she teaches as a way to engage participants and demonstrate effective presentation skills. And you're in for a treat. Lisa has shared with us a short clip of her in action, which we're going to show for you in just a minute. Lisa, do you want to just give a little bit of context?
Absolutely. So what I do is an art form called it's called solo performance, which is like a play, but I do all the parts. And my latest offering is this interactive online comedy show for companies with remote teams. And what inspired it was that at the start of the pandemic, my husband put his work from home desk in our hallway right in front of our bathroom door. So I created a farce about what that is like. And so what you're about to see is a clip about what it is like what a typical morning is like with my husband's desk in our hallway.
Wonderful.
I wake up in the morning and head to the bathroom. Kevin has to roll his wheelie chair in for me to get by. Roll. Next, I head to the kitchen to make breakfast. Roll. We're out of oatmeal, so I head to the basement to get some. Back to the kitchen with the oatmeal. Can't read the directions on the package. Head to the bedroom for my reading glasses. Not here. Okay, they must be in the bathroom. Not here either. Okay, they are definitely in the back office. Found them! Back to the kitchen! Now I can read the instructions, but I have to pee. Again. Should I hold it? I don't want to hold it. All I am trying to do is make breakfast. I've got nothing to feel guilty about.
Lisa, I hate having you walk behind me.
Kevin, where do you expect me to walk instead? Under you?
Yes, applause. That is terrific, Lisa. And we at PowerSpeaking have benefited from that entire show, and it's engaging and fun throughout. Thank you. We're going to talk in just a bit more about, again, how all of that expertise is applied in your coaching and training with PowerSpeaking clients and others. All right. Also joining us with that big smile is Donnie Hill. Donnie has held numerous positions at PowerSpeaking. Currently, like Lisa, he's one of our expert facilitators. And Donnie has held, as I said, multiple roles. He loves helping business leaders cultivate their influence and advance their communication skills so they stand out in their organization or field. He's a business and marketing strategist, as well as a leadership development coach for social impact entrepreneurs, plus business and community leaders. Donnie holds a drama degree from Stanford University and has worked as a professional actor. And Donnie has graciously shared with us photos from some of the many performances he's been in. So we'll share those now. And Donnie, feel free to give just a little bit of color.
Yeah, so part of my theater experience has been really understanding human behavior and patterns and understanding different aspects of my personality. So in this play, I was a lieutenant. It was from a play called Our Country's Good, and we were bringing slaves over from from Australia. And the other picture that I didn't show is me playing one of the Aboriginal people that we brought over. That one was a different show. This was a 3-person Tempest, where I played 3 different roles. Here I was playing Caliban. And I would say this one was probably the most difficult role for me, because Caliban is meant to be incredibly base. And to go from that to a prince, all in a matter of 2 hours, was incredibly challenging. But this was probably one of my favorite shows.
Powerful.
Yeah. And this was me playing Jackie Robinson. This was the very last show that I did. And I was on a tour of the show for 7 weeks. We were doing 2 to 3 shows a day. And this was right in the middle of the show. Movement for the show was a lot of fun, because depending on the stage, we had to arrange the seating in a way that allowed me to look like I was running the bases, and all of it was in slow motion. And fortunately, this one was one of the bigger stages, but there were some stages where you're literally, maybe 6 feet apart from one another, and you're having to try and make this look like you're running inside of a baseball stadium.
Wow.
I call this my hustle project. So between shows, I found out that there was a promotion that this company was looking for dancers for the Cirque du Soleil Ovu show. And so I was one of the promotional dancers. And this one was also one that challenged me a lot, because part of the work was to go out to these different venues and go to parks and other places where people were normally having a really peaceful experience, and to go up to them and ask them if they wanted to dance with us. And then we would have to show them our dance. And fortunately, there was always a kind-hearted soul who would come and dance with us. But sometimes getting them to do it was incredibly painful. And you would think, why am I doing this again?
In this silly costume.
Silly costume.
Oh, gosh. Thank you so much for sharing that, Donnie. I'm just so struck by the wide diversity of roles that you've played. That's just really remarkable. Thank you. All right. We also have with us today Brian Moore. Brian has two different roles for PowerSpeaking. He's our content manager, working internally on staff, and he also serves as a master facilitator and coach. And what's really cool is that Brian, for these live events, is typically behind the scenes serving as a moderator. So it's really fun to bring you front and center for a change. Over a decade of experience in theater and the performing arts makes Brian Moore one seriously dynamic facilitator and coach. His years of experience as a senior leader with corporations adds to his credibility, along with his passion for recognizing and nurturing talent. Brian holds a BFA in acting from Long Island University. Brian has also graciously shared some photos from a few of his performances, which we'll share with you.
I have to say, Donnie, I was in Our Country's Good as well. I've never met another person who's heard of or done that show before, so that was pretty nuts. Yeah. This is from one of the most recent shows I did. There was a 3-person comedic version of Sherlock Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles, and I played Watson. It's an actual mustache. I grew it myself.
And aren't you up for an award?
I am.
For that performance?
Yeah. I think if you go to BroadwayWorld.com, I got nominated for they do local theater awards. I was nominated for Best Actor in a Play. So,
vote for Brian.
Yeah.
Everyone. Andrew, feel free to put that link in chat.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, this is a show called The Complete Works of Shakespeare Abridged. It's a 3-person comedy show where we go through all of Shakespeare's plays. And this is me being very serious with a toy boat. This is me playing Juliet, obviously taking it very seriously and sticking a knife up my nose. But it was a lot of fun. That was a great show. We had a real good time.
It's evident.
Yeah. But yeah.
Oh, terrific. Thank you so much. And we already have a question. Thank you, David Goad. David Goad is one of our master facilitators, and he asked Donnie, adjusting to different stage environments sounds familiar. How do you overcome the anxiety that comes from not having everything where you expected it to be for an important presentation?
I have learned that 80% is perfectly okay. And so my philosophy as I walk into any kind of environment is if I have 80%, then I'm going to be okay. And the other 20%, I will figure it out in the moment. I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I've learned in performing, because you want the show to go well. You expect the things are going to go the way that they're going to go. And then you go for a prop and a prop isn't there. A light goes out, or we jump 5 pages in the script, and you just have to figure it out from there. And so I think knowing that most of it is going to be the same has been very grounding for me. And then have the expectation that there could be a 20% variable. It takes some of the pressure off it needing to be perfect.
Great advice. Lisa or Brian, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that staying loose is really important in theater and in presentations. And I think one way to help stay loose is that the audience really doesn't have any idea what was going to happen. So, the whole point, comedy, everything comes from the joy of surprise. And so sometimes we're surprised by things. And so if we stay loose and we're not so tight on, okay, it's going to go here and here and here and here, and be rigid about that, if we can, and I tell participants to do that when they're like, oh, I've got to memorize this, which is about having, if you think about it, that's about having an expectation about how what they're going to say is going to go exactly as planned. And the problem with that is, we inevitably say a word differently or in a different order, and then you find these presenters who start wincing out uncontrollably as they're editing themselves in front of the room. So I think the staying loose piece and knowing that no one really knows what's going to happen. So as long as you keep taking care of them and have some clarity about where you want to go, everything's going to be fine.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, I think, everything both of you said resonates a lot. I think it's always remembering the intention. I think we touch on this later on too, is it's like, you remember that you're there for a reason, especially in these presentations. We always talk about audience first, right? You're there to make your audience think, feel, or do something. So as long as you have that at the forefront, you know, you could perform in a bathroom stall if that's where your audience was, right? As long as you know that what you're saying is to get them to do something, I think you have all the tools you need to do that. And everything else is frosting, right?
Yeah. So it's not about perfection. It's about serving the needs of the audience. That's great. That's great. And that in of itself, I think, could take some pressure off. Lisa, it looked like you had.
And also, so if you're not attached to the outcome and you're open to, oh, there's something different than what I thought, then all of a sudden, actually, it can actually be better ultimately than you anticipated. So I was doing a fundraiser at a restaurant and I assumed I would have a stage, but when I arrived, I was told, no, there's no stage. And everyone sort of grouped all around this room. And I thought, well, okay, this isn't ideal, I don't think, but how can I make this work for myself? And what I realized was I was telling 4 stories. And so I could actually position myself at one wall for the first story, and then I could move to the next wall for the second story. And so this then created more structure. These transitions created more structure for the presentation that I was doing. It actually worked better than if I just been in one spot.
Great example. So we touched on this a little bit, and I'd like to hear more about it. One of the things that always marvels me about actors is what appears to be their ability to memorize, in some cases, many lines. And I'd love to understand what techniques that you use to accomplish that. How can that be applied to presenting without coming off too scripted?
Brian, you want to take this one?
I can start. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that, well, first, like in a very technical sense, right? There's neuroscience that says you have to hear something 8 times before you can commit it to memory. So say it out loud. You know, it's going to be a lot more difficult to memorize something reading it to yourself in your mind over and over again on a page. You need to be able to hear it out loud so that you're internalizing it mentally, but you're also internalizing it auditorially. But I think in a larger sense is to, and I think this especially applies when you're approaching language that isn't natural to you. So if you're Shakespeare's, your Greeks, your classics, right? You have to know what you're saying. So to look at the performance as a whole, to understand the through line, what's the journey, and I think this especially applies to any presentation you're going to give. Like, what's the through line? So once you know the journey, it's a lot easier to memorize then, because you're putting it in sequence. So you have those transition triggers to remember the next bit, the next line, and it progresses logically.
Great. Anything to add?
I would say now, being out of acting for a while, memorization has actually gotten a lot harder for me, because it's a muscle. Yeah, it really is a muscle, and you don't realize how much you've cultivated that muscle until you're out of it. So I'm having to find new ways to memorize. And some of it is finding the through line for my story or my presentation or my workshop. And some of it is almost kind of using it as puzzle pieces. So putting the puzzle together in real time of like, okay, I know I want to talk about this. 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 I don't quite know how they all fit together. But when I have a group of people in front of me, then I can assess what they need and then bring that information together. So sometimes doing it in real time will allow me to memorize it in a very different way than had I tried to memorize it beforehand.
Yeah, I have one more thought on this. I just thought about was that so like the cornerstone of my acting training was movement based, and I think to apply that to a performance is that the body, your gestures, and the speech, the words aren't two different things. They aren't separate. So if you can tie body movements in with the words that you're saying, your brain's gonna remember that as well. So the more that you can use it all together, the easier it is for your brain to remember.
Excellent.
So my shows are sometimes 85 minutes long, and I'm the only person talking that whole time. So if things go wrong, like I can't look to anyone else to save me. I mean, I guess I could look to the stage manager to ask for a prompt. And so after these shows, yes, people frequently, the first thing they say is, wow, how did you memorize all of that? And that, quite frankly, is the least of what goes into it. And I think this is directly transferable to presentations as well, because it was the figuring out of what is the story and what beat follows what next beat, what scene, how is this all going to coalesce around that through line that both Donnie and Brian talked about. And when we think about a presentation, if we think about what is the core message, figuring out what that core message is, what is your action step, the subject matter expertise that you're needing to draw on in order to share the evidence that is going to be persuasive and compelling and concise. Once you've done all that, I think the order and you remembering what to say takes care of itself, because you've had to do all that preparation work. So yes, if we just think of these words as disembodied, as Brian is saying, like they're just sort of, I need to like somehow just be blabbing on and it's not hooked into anything, well, that's going to be pretty impossible. It would be like trying to memorize a grocery list. And that there's a reason we write down grocery lists, because it's a random hodgepodge word salad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's to really think about what are we wanting to convey and let that carry us through.
Perfect. And as you all know, we provide frameworks that help you to tell that story in a way that's very, very effective and flows naturally. So let's talk about stage fright. We kicked off the session posing that question. Is that something you experience, and what advice do you have for dealing with it?
All the time, regardless of what I'm doing. For me, I'm definitely more of a movement kinesthetic person. And if I can get myself into my body and out of my head, then that makes it a lot easier for me. So I tend to do a lot of kind of somatic exercises. I'll squeeze my feet or pat them on the ground a little bit just so I can get grounded again. And I'll pat my legs or pat my arms, and that helps soothe my system a bit. But then it allows me to also be very present of like, okay, my body is here. I've just connected with it and I've connected with him.
Great.
I don't think stage fright in and of itself is such a big deal. I really want, particularly beforehand, I really want to be in a place of acceptance and surrender to whatever is happening, because that's what's going to keep me grounded and open and connected and ready to respond in a helpful way, in a productive way to whatever's going on. I think it's when we start labeling our experience as or telling us we should be feeling some other way than we actually are feeling, that's when we get into some real trouble. And like right now, I'm working on a brand new show, and I know for certain I am probably not going to remember exactly what happens next. And that does cause me some concern, because if I start going down the wrong path, there's no one else who's going to be like, hey, Lisa, get back over here. So, I mean, I am going to have a little cheat sheet for myself with just like the scene order, so I can look at it. And that's also going to do a lot to, okay, worst case scenario, I can't remember what comes next. The audience is going to be fine if I take a moment to look at a sheet of paper. What's the big deal?
Great point. Brian, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think to Lisa's point, yeah, fright is such a loaded word, right? There are always nerves. You're always going to have anxiety, because that doesn't matter how much you've prepared. You're doing it for people. You're doing it for an audience So by its very nature, it's for somebody else, and they're the unknown variable. So I feel like the only way you would be able to walk into a presentation or a performance and not feel any kind of nerves is if you were so rigid in what you were about to do that you were planning to be completely unaffected by the audience there. And I don't think that makes for a compelling performance or presentation. So I think the nerves come from knowing that there's an unknown variable, but to be able to settle into that, to Donnie's point, right, especially in physically, right, I like to keep low. You stomp into the ground, you remember that you take up space, that you have gravity, that you're there for a reason, and you're there to affect the other bodies in your orbit, right? And so to be able to channel those nerves into being more present, more aware of how your audience or your scene partner is reacting to whatever you're doing in the moment allows you to be flexible and overall more effective in delivering your message.
Wonderful.
Mary, you just reminded me of, this was a little bit of what we were talking about beforehand. What I shared with the group was, at one point I was auditioning for MFAs, and one of the casting directors went into the audition and he could tell that I was visibly nervous. And so he stopped me because he was also somewhat of a friend. And he said, Donnie, I want you to succeed. And that just helped me relax a little bit. And so I think that's important for presenters and leaders. You're going into this meeting or you're going to give this presentation to share your expertise and what you've spent your time doing. So your audience wants you to win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've talked about some advice for memorization, managing anxiety, stage fright. What else? What are share some specific examples of where you've drawn on your acting experience in coaching sessions when helping people to enhance their presentation skills?
Well, in addition to just acting, when I think about conceiving of a show, I also bring that in because I think staging is so important. And props, the clip that we shared earlier of me with that props are extraordinarily effective in person and even more effective in virtual presenting. So I always urge people to bring something into the screen that is visually interesting, because unfortunately, when we are presenting virtually, the gestures that we would typically be using to great effect if we are in person, they're not as effective because we're so quickly out of the screen. Whereas a prop, we can always have it in the screen. It can disrupt the pattern. I think it's really, really helpful. And the other piece is the idea of putting your whole body into telling the story, whether it's on stage or in a presentation. Because what I found is, so in my shows, I've done things. I've embodied a train track. I've been my dogs. I've been, ants. I've done everything. And there's real transferability even to business presentations, because frequently when we're working with someone who is a computer programmer, a high-tech person who is talking about routers and complicated systems, or we're working with a scientist who's doing drug development and what is the mechanism of action of the drug. The processes that they are describing are very complicated and dense and hard to track. And frequently a visual aid of a slide can be very busy and confusing. And I encourage people, and they always resist. I remember to actually be the process, be the router, or be the cholesterol that's attaching to the liver cell. And I have them actually act it out, and they always say, no, that is ridiculous. I'm going to make a fool of myself. I will have no credibility. And I can tell you, we push past it, and invariably people say that was the highlight of the presentation. So to physically put your body into telling the story is absolutely, absolutely helpful on stage and in a presentation.
And it clearly stretches people out of their comfort zone, but breaking through that really, as you described, sets them apart. And I really appreciate that you brought up the importance of props, because especially in this virtual environment, it's underutilized significantly, and it's a great way to really add impact.
And Isabel's asking about props as well. And so it's anything related to the product or anything that you're talking, the topic, anything related to the topic that you're speaking about that can help bring it to life. Or if you're using an analogy of some kind, or you're sharing a personal interest to tie into what you're talking about, to give evidence of what that, to actually hold it up. I love tennis. You know, hold up your racket. Hold up a tennis ball, anything, really, have fun. It doesn't, and you don't have to belabor it. It doesn't have to be there the whole time. Just a little something, something. Okay, I've talked enough. Everyone else.
Great. Thanks for the question, Izzy. Donnie, what about you?
Yeah, for me, it's staying curious and connected to the content, because I think when you're constantly talking about your subject matter expertise for a long time, you just go on autopilot, right? And so I think about specifically doing the show Most Valuable Player with Jackie Robinson. And about a month into it, I was thinking, I still have 3 more weeks to go of this show. I'm like, how am I going to get through this? And part of it is almost being curious about the content again, of like, oh, why is this interesting to say? Or why is this fun to say? Or what am I excited about with regards to this particular topic? And what's playful about it? What's serious about it? So really looking at it from all of these different lenses can be really beneficial. And what I find when working with participants is that it does 2 things. One, it makes them stop and think, oh, wow, I have just been on autopilot for a long time talking about it because I'm dealing with the content every day, all day. But the other piece is it actually ends up slowing them down because now they're really considering, oh, this is the first time that this audience might be hearing it. Or I haven't said it that way before. And I can spend some time kind of really enjoying the language or really enjoying the concept. And then I watch them light up as they begin talking about their content again. And we'll practice. And they just have a different connection to it. And it's lighter, it's more connected, it's in pace. And they also have nuance with it. So it doesn't sound so monotone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Brian?
Yeah, I think there are 2 things quickly. I think there's this idea that I think you can manufacture presence in a certain way sometimes by was always taught, you start from a solid base when you're standing, but if you were to put yourself off balance even imperceptibly to the audience, so just a slight shift to the front or to the side, it helps in 2 ways, right? Your audience is already is engaged with you because your body is engaged, your core is engaged, you look like you're going to do something, so the audience is going to pay attention to you. And then for you personally, you're engaged, right? Your body's moving, your brain is moving, you are ready to be flexible and adaptable in the moment. So I think it's a very simple tactile way to again, to manufacture stage presence. But I think when you're looking at text, this concept that we use in acting, this concept of beats and intentions, I think is huge. And again, to go back to what I was mentioning before, is you always want to remember, whether it's a performance or a presentation, that you're there to get somebody to do something, whether it's your scene partner or whether it's your audience. You're there for a reason and you want them to do something. And there are different circles of that awareness, right? So your presentation has an overall intention or objective, right? By the end of this presentation, you want your audience to do something, but you can dig deeper into that. So in any given beat or piece, or if you're looking at your framework and any given section of that framework, that section, you also are intentional about what you want from your audience, right? That piece is there for a reason, and you're intentional about what you want your audience to do in that piece. That supports the overall message. And then you can go even a step further. Each sentence, each word in that paragraph or that piece is there intentionally, is there for a reason, is there to get somebody or something to do something in support of that, whatever that larger beat and that overall intention is. So yeah.
Wow.
That was, yeah, that was
These are all so applicable. And it's kind of like bringing choreography into looking at the story or the presentation that you're going to tell and make it complete in terms of the words and the body. So Donnie, you talked about, you know, if it's 80%, you know, 80% things in place, you know, you'll be fine. Would each of you be willing to share a time in which something went horribly wrong on stage, how you dealt with it, what you learned from it?
Yeah, mine happened in 3-person Tempest. So one, it's Shakespeare, and two, like, if you just lose track, then it just throws a whole bunch of stuff off. So I think I ended up skipping 2 or 3 pages, which in that particular version of it was actually 2 scenes ahead. So fortunately, it was the same characters, but it was 2 very different points in the story. And so I literally just froze in the middle of the show. And fortunately, my my fellow actors, I don't remember what they said, but they somehow like magically wove it back to bring the context back into the scene and to cue up my line. But it was one of those deer in the headlight moments of, wow, I don't know where to go from this. And because this isn't standard American English, I also feel super lost. And I think part of the application there, and maybe this is to Lisa's point, when you are the one giving the presentation, sometimes you just have to acknowledge, hey, I need a moment or I'm lost, because that's the only way you're going to get back on track. But when you are giving, say, a group presentation, it's really nice having Lisa and Brian here and you here in case I go up on the line, like, I don't know where to go, because you can lean into one another. So it really just depends on the support system that you have in place for yourself.
Terrific. It makes me think of in our Speaking Up program, we talk about the importance of having a sponsor. And in those moments, you can look to your sponsor to kind of serve as your advocate and help you. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, I can think of, this is about, and so I was doing a touring show. It was called Classics on Tour. We were going to schools this is when I lived in New York, and I lived in a little apartment in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, and the show was in the morning at a PS in the Bronx. And I had my little pickup truck, and when I had looked it up, because I didn't have a phone with a GPS, so when I looked it up the night before, I thought I had plenty of time. Woke up a little late. I drive the car. I'm running way behind. Can't get up. I can't get up there. I get to the school literally just as my scene partner is saying my cue line for the first, because the director was going to come on and play my role with a book in hand. So I walk in the back of the auditorium as he's saying my cue line. I'm running down the center of the auditorium, all these kids there. And as I'm saying my line, I dive onto the stage, which was raised. I smashed my knee, finished the show, pure adrenaline, finished the show, but like slowly bleeding through my pants leg the whole time in front of a bunch of children. But the show must go on, as they say. But yeah, that was a nightmare. And I've been over an hour early to everything ever since.
Main lesson learned from that one is to arrive early, allow plenty of time.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And you are here to talk about it.
Yeah.
And you've done many, many performances since then, right? You survived.
Yeah, just with a slight limp, and it's okay.
What about you, Lisa?
So what happened was I jumped ahead 20 minutes in the show and didn't realize for 5 minutes. And then I realized, and I had, you know, that moment of, okay, of sickened realization of what has happened. And I assessed, can I just keep going? And the answer was no. The audience would be, too many plot points were missed. If the answer had been yes, I would have kept going, even though the audience had lost lots of jokes and things like that. I would have just kept going because I want to take care of them. And so I realized I simply had to stop the show. And so I called an audible. I said, well, I've jumped ahead. And I said, so, and then I directed to my tech. I said, okay, so I'm going to go back to the point, and I gave her the cue we were going to pick it up on. And I said, and then you'll see what happens next. Cause we had a good relationship. And so we just kept going. And I was very aware that it was so important that even though I was internally freaking out about this, and I felt, oh gosh, I was like, the audience doesn't need this. The audience does not need my angst. My angst in this moment isn't helping anybody. So let's just keep going and be in a place of acceptance about this. And as long as I'm not beating myself up, they're not going to beat me up. And that's true in presenting as well. It's when the presenter starts doing the negative self-talk, everyone can tell, the castigation, everyone can tell, and then they turn against you. So as long as you keep it light and like, hey, I'm human, you're human, I'm sure you've forgotten things too, everything's going to be okay. The audience will be really, really forgiving. And as Isabel's saying, the audience is on your side when these kinds of things go wrong. And it's like the ice skater who falls on the ground. Wow, they pick themselves up and they keep going. The audience is thrilled. Everyone's on your side. They so want you. They're like, oh, wow, look at that effort. Look at how she triumphed. They're even more on board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Amy says, so appreciate the humanity and vulnerability being shared. Makes me feel like we can all do this. Absolutely. I'd like to talk a little bit. Brian, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was going to comment on Izzy's comment as well. And I think Donnie touched on that before, and Lisa did too. Like, it's so important to remember, especially when you're dealing with those inevitable nerves before you get in front of a group of people, you are never going to be in a room where people want you to fail. So just to recognize that and to allow for the unexpected, to allow for a mistake, to allow, it's okay if you forget the next bit, to take a breath, right? Time on stage also dilates in a weird way, right? Like you think you've forgotten what your next thing is, and you feel like it's been 20 minutes and it's been 30 seconds. So just, your audience is going to give you the grace to make a mistake, and you need to give yourself that same grace. So
absolutely. Like Donnie's stage director, we want you to be successful, right? Yeah. And you don't want to put your audience in a position in which they're feeling uncomfortable for you or sorry for you. So getting out of your head and continuing to serve the audience. I'd like to talk a little bit about improvisation. I can't say it, improv. Anything we can learn from improv as it relates to presenting and thinking on your feet?
Yes, and obviously is the main go-to for everybody. But I find it most helpful when there's disagreement, either inside of a meeting or if someone is offering a challenging question, right? Because that person is they're having their own experience, or they have their own lens that they're looking through. And so just validating that they have this experience that might be in opposition to yours, I think is really important in terms of helping you keep your cool in the moment, especially if you get triggered. And also in terms of like the graciousness and your credibility as a speaker or a leader, because it means you're taking into consideration their point of view. So there's that aspect. I would also think about what playfulness looks like. Improv is all about play. And if that's not integrated into your work, then it becomes really stale.
Mhm.
It becomes really.
Yeah, I think, in improv, and especially in a presentation setting, it's about adaptability, right?
Yeah.
As we had talked about before, if you go in knowing exactly what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, you don't allow for the audience's reaction to affect what you're saying, right? Because you're not going in there to give a performance, right? It's a presentation. You're looking to change hearts and minds, or you're looking to achieve something, to get something. And if you walk in and the thing that you had prepared isn't doing that, and you can see from the audience or from the decision maker that your current tactics aren't working to achieve your overall goal, you need to be able to be adaptable. You need to be able to be flexible. And I think improv, it allows you to do that, right? It allows you to stay in the moment and to to throw it all away if it needs to be thrown away, and recognize that the intention's still there. And as long as I'm moving in that direction, I can be more effective.
Excellent.
I hate improv. I mean, I like seeing good improv, but personally, I hate improv because, as Donnie was saying, yes and is what you're supposed to do. And I'm a no but person. That's how I showed up on the planet. And for me, it's like it's too loose. And if I do have an intention, there's a reason I have that intention. And someone wants to throw me off that intention. Who in what army is going to try to throw me off where I want to go? No, no, no. So don't get me. You don't want to improvise with me, people. It is not going to be a fun experience for anybody. I'm going to be very grumpy. But what I do think is important in improvising is listening. And that is what I think is so important in presenting as well. Because that is what enables the adaptability. It's okay, where is this person coming from? What matters to them that also matters to me? And how can we then adjust and adapt based on that?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And I think, Lisa, I think you'd agree. You very rarely see good improv, because the people who are good at it are very good at it. It is not an easy thing to do. So I would not advocate for leaning completely on improvising when you walk into a room. It's a tool. It is not it's not a philosophy. It's
I took one and only improv class when I was in my 20s. And the first activity we had to do was, and it was a room where the seats were like this, and the stage was down in the center. And we each had to come up and act as if we're an animal. I seriously have never been that mortified and exposed. I tried to be a cat, and it was just absurd. And I remember that moment. This was back in my 20s, a long time ago. I remember it very, very, very vividly. So I can relate, Lisa. We have a question from David. Brian, this is going back to something you brought earlier. What you said about signaling with your body that you're going to do something is interesting. Question for the panel: how do you signal you want to speak in a meeting when you are reduced to a camera frame or cameras are off in a virtual meeting?
I mean, you have to, I think you have to use the tools that you have for you, right? It's I think sometimes, and it depends on who's leading the meeting, who the person is in charge of granting attention, right? I know that I can speak personally, right? I work with Carrie a lot. Carrie's great at, if you're in a group of people and you just take yourself off mute, Carrie will notice and say, did you want to say something? So not everybody is that aware and in the moment and granting it. So you have to advocate for yourself. You have to raise your hand, or, if your cameras are off, use the hand raise icon. But I think outside of that, it's tough because you've only got this much to work with, and you don't want to be like, you can't overdo it in a window like you can in a room. So you don't have the benefit of the whole body. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, we are nearing the end here. I'd love if each of you would just share what parting advice you have for your audience.
Yeah, I tend to attract the leaders and business professionals who are on the quieter, more introverted side. And so when they find out that I'm an actor, um, they there's a hesitation, and I tell them all the time, I'm not interested in you being Broadway. I don't want you to be on Broadway. I don't want you to be uncomfortable, but I do want you to be bigger in your movement than you normally would, which in itself, it takes them out of their comfort zone. But what I think is really important is I want you to move, but I want it to be authentic movement. Or I want you to say something and I want it to be authentically said. And so there's the Donnie version, there's the Brian version, there's the Lisa version, there's the Carrie version. We could be saying the same things, but how we go about saying it is going to be different, and how we go about physically expressing it is going to be different. And so I really try and advocate for like, what does an authentic nonverbal and verbal communication look like for you?
Great. Let it suit your own style. Thank you.
I think at the risk of further beating a dead horse, it's about remembering that you are there to get somebody to do something. Your job as a presenter, as a performer, is not to perform. It is to influence, to affect. So if you keep that at the forefront of your mind, it takes the pressure off of you as the presenter, and then when you look at your, to Donnie's point, your most authentic self, and maybe even a slightly exaggerated version of your authentic self in service of getting that message and getting the result that you want. When you look at it through that way, it's a lot less nerve-wracking when you're thinking about, how am I moving my arm in this moment? How am I conveying myself to a group of people? What does it look like from their point of view? Am I getting what I need from them? It takes the pressure off.
Excellent.
I really want people to get out of their own way and show up big and bold in the service, as Brian was saying, of what they're hoping to achieve. That's what I want, unvarnished. I find so many people are so constricted, and there's so many layers, and they're so scared to share what they really believe, and they don't even trust themselves and what they know, and it's just all this sort of crumbly, imploded. I'm like, get over yourself. You got something to share it, please.
Yes. We have some, go ahead.
Brian and Lisa both reminded me of, like, I also don't want to talk to anybody after I get done performing. Like, I need a moment to myself. And I think it's perfectly okay for you to do that too. If you just like, okay, I gave this 30-minute presentation. Now I need to go out for a walk, or I need to go to the bathroom and cry, or whatever the case may be.
I think we have a lot of facilitators on this call. I think everybody can commiserate with like 4 hours of like hearing yourself talk. And then my wife will come home and be like, how was your day? And I'll be like, I can't make a sentence, and I don't want to hear my own voice anymore. So like, ask me tomorrow, and I'll tell you all about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your talent, and also for offering such inspiring practical advice. Yeah, let's get out of our way and have an impact. I mentioned this is the last live event of this year. However, we will be continuing in 2023. And the topic that we're going to be covering in January is one that is something all organizations are grappling with, and that's how to really be an effective communicator in a hybrid environment. So I encourage you to look out for that and join us for our next PowerSpeaking Live event. And again, thank you so much, Lisa, Donnie, and Brian. Just terrific.